Hello, seniors! It's been a while, and I hope you are all in good health for today's another discussion. So let us go on the journey of learning on the field of Philippine politics and governance. Brace yourselves and have a happy learning ahead.
The legislative branch of the Philippine government. This lesson is a survey of the legislative branch of the Philippine government. It also focuses on the components of the Constitution that pertain to legislative power and the important role that the legislative branch plays in our government. Before we proceed with our discussion, let us first look upon our topic's content standard. Demonstrate an understanding of the historical background of Philippine democratic politics, the executive, the legislative, the judiciary, and decentralization and local governance. For the performance standard, explain the rules of different political institutions. Lastly, for the most essential learning competency, the learners should differentiate the rules and responsibilities of the Philippine Senate and the House of Representatives. Now that you are already familiar with content standard, performance standard, and most essential learning competency, let us now proceed to our discussion. Legislative branch. The legislative branch of the government is its law-making body that is tasked to deliver the needs of the state, such as laws, budgets, disciplinary actions, and other policies with the assistance of the executive department. It is also the avenue of all investigations in aid of legislation in order to formulate the necessary laws in certain problems and issues. The legislative branch of the government is a branch whose appropriate functions is the making or enactment of laws. In the Philippines, the Congress of the Philippines is the repository of legislative power. The policies needed to address issues such as poverty, welfare, economic development, criminality, social justice, human rights, and many others are usually in the form of laws created by the legislative branch. The legislative branch is bicameral or composed of two chambers, namely the Senate of the Philippines and the House of Representatives. So let us look upon them one by one. So the first one is Philippine Senate. It is the upper chamber of the Congress of the Philippines, which is headed by the Senate President. It is smaller than the House of Representatives but have certain powers the House of Representatives does not have. The composition of the Philippine Senate. The first one is that lawmakers in the Senate are called senators, just like Senator Manny Pacquiao and Senator Risa Hontiveros. The next one is that the Senate shall be composed of 24 senators who shall be elected at large or nationwide through popular election by the qualified voters of the Philippines as may be provided by law. And the third one is that through synchronized elections, 12 senators are elected every 3 years. Terms of office of Philippine senators. The first one is that the term of office of the senators shall be 6 years and shall commence, unless otherwise provided by law, at noon on the 30th day of June next following their election. The second one, no senator shall serve for more than 2 consecutive terms. The regular election of the senators shall be held on the second Monday of May. And lastly, in case of vacancy in the Senate, a special election may be called to fill such vacancy in the manner prescribed by law, but the senator thus elected shall serve only for the unexpired term. Qualifications of Senator. The first one is that a natural-born citizen of the Philippines, at least 35 years old, is able to read and write, a registered voter, and a resident of the Philippines for not less than 2 years before election day. The second chamber of the legislative branch is the House of Representatives. It is the lower chamber of the Congress of the Philippines and is headed by the Speaker of the House. It is bigger than the Senate and is divided into congressmen from districts and representatives from party lists. Composition of House of Representatives. Lawmakers composing the House of Representatives are called representatives or congressmen or congresswomen. 250 elected representatives, which includes the district representatives and the party list representatives. Terms of office of members of House of Representatives. A representative can serve for not more than 3 consecutive terms. The members of the House of Representatives shall be elected for a term of 3 years, which shall begin, unless otherwise provided by law, at noon on the 30th day of June next following their election. No member of the House of Representatives shall serve for more than 3 consecutive terms. The regular election of the members of the House of Representatives shall be held on the second Monday of May. And lastly, in case of vacancy in the House of Representatives, a special election may be called to fill such vacancy in the manner prescribed by law, but the member of the House of Representatives thus elected shall serve only for the unexpired term. Qualifications of members of the House of Representatives. A natural-born citizen of the Philippines, at least 25 years old, is able to read and write, except the party list representatives, a registered voter and a resident for at least 1 year in the district where he or she shall be elected. Powers of Senate and House of Representatives. Although senators and members of the House of Representatives are all lawmakers and is required to construct laws for the betterment of the people, that is having the duty to make laws, they differ in the measures they initiate. But they share some powers, and these are: first one, power of impeachment, power of legislative inquiry, power of appropriation, and lastly, power of taxation. So let us look upon them one by one. The first one is the power of impeachment. Impeachment cases are charges of grave misconduct against a public official for offenses such as treason, bribery, and other high crimes. The House of Representatives has the exclusive power to initiate impeachment cases. On the other hand, the Senate has the sole power to try and decide all cases of impeachment. The House of Representatives can tackle impeachment complaints and submit the resolution setting the articles of impeachment. The Senate, meanwhile, decides on cases of impeachment in a full-blown trial until a decision is made. Power of legislative inquiry. The Congress has the power to investigate or administer an inquiry in aid of legislation, meaning they can invite a resource person to provide insights on how a law could be crafted or an existing law amended. Such inquiries may refer to the implementation or examination of any law or appropriation, or in connection with any proposed legislation or the formulation of, or in connection with future legislation, or will aid in the review, formulation of a new legislative policy or enactment. Power of appropriation. The Congress holds the so-called power of the purse, meaning the Congress can pass appropriation laws to authorize the release of public funds from the Treasury for use of the various agencies of the government. It can decide whether or not to add or reduce a government agency's budget, effectively overseeing budget appropriations and being on the guard against suspected corruption. Power of taxation. Taxes are regarded as the lifeblood of the state as they provide needed funding which enables the government to operate and serve the public. Thus, the Congress, subject to certain limitations, may impose or increase taxes on a particular taxable item or transaction in order to increase government revenues. The power to tax is purely legislative in character. It is up to Congress which will determine the subjects or objects to be taxed, purpose, the amount of the rate, and the manner and means of its collection. Let us also talk about the other powers of the Congress. The first one is that Congress has the sole power to declare the existence of a state of war. According to Section 23, Article 6 of the Constitution, a vote of two-thirds of both houses voting separately is needed in order to declare the existence of a state of war. Congress can revoke the President's proclamation of martial law. This can happen by a vote of at least a majority of all members of the Senate and the House. If requested, Congress can also extend the period of martial law beyond the mandated 60 days. Congress may authorize the President to exercise other powers to carry out a declared national policy for a limited period and subject to restrictions in times of war or another national emergency. Congress, through the Commission on Appointments, can approve or reject some key appointments made by the President to government agencies. Congress needs to concur with any amnesty granted by the President according to Section 19, Article 7 of the Constitution. A vote of majority of all members is needed for this. Congress is heavily involved in starting charter change. It can either convene into Constituent Assembly through a vote of 3/4 of all members and propose both amendments and revisions, or call for an election of members of a Constitutional Convention, a vote of 2/3 of its member. Legislative process. Congress is responsible for making enabling laws to make sure the spirit of the Constitution is upheld in the country, and at times amend or change the Constitution itself. In order to craft laws, the legislative body comes out with two main documents, bills and resolutions. Resolutions convey principles and sentiments of the Senate or the House of Representatives. Resolutions is divided into three. The first one is joint resolutions. Joint resolutions require the approval of both chambers of Congress and the signature of the President and have the force and effect of a law if approved. Concurrent resolutions. Concurrent resolutions are used for matters affecting the operations of both chambers of Congress and must be approved in the same form by both houses but are not transmitted to the President for his signature and therefore have no force and effect of a law. And the last one is simple resolutions. Simple resolutions deal with matters entirely within the prerogative of one chamber of Congress and are not referred to the President for his signature and therefore have no force and effect of a law. Bills are laws in the making. They pass into law when they are approved by both houses and the President of the Philippines. A bill may be vetoed by the President, but the House of Representatives may overturn a presidential veto by garnering a two-thirds vote. If the President does not act on a proposed law submitted by Congress, it will lapse into law after 30 days of receipt. How laws are created in Congress. A law starts as a bill or draft of the law. Lawmakers will draft and propose a bill that will undergo different steps or procedures, and the first step would be first reading. Any member of either house may present a bill. During the first reading, the bill is read by its number and title, to be followed by the referral to appropriate committee. The bill is referred to the proper committee for study or consideration, and then it will proceed to second reading. If the committee reports the bill favorably, the bill is forwarded to the Committee on Rules so that it can be calendared for deliberation on second reading. At this point, the bill is read in its entirety. Once the second reading is done, general debates will follow. A general debate is then opened after the second reading, and amendments may be proposed by any member of the Congress. Printing and distribution. After approval on second reading, the bill is then ordered and printed in its final form, and copies are distributed among members of the House ready for the third reading. At this stage, only the title of the bill is read. Upon the last reading of a bill, no amendment is allowed and the vote is taken immediately. And then, it will be referred to the other house. If approved, the bill is then referred to the other house, ready for submission to the President. A bill approved on third reading by both houses shall be printed in enrolled form and transmitted to the President for his action. When does a bill become a law? The first one is that when the President approves the bill by signing it. If the bill is approved by the President, the same is assigned a Republic Act number and transmitted to the House where it originated. The second one, if the bill is vetoed, the same, together with a message citing the reason for the veto, is transmitted to the House where the bill is originated. When the President vetoes the bill and returns the same with his objections to the chamber where it originated, and the same is repassed over his veto by a vote of two-thirds of all members of both chambers. And lastly, if the President does not communicate his veto of any bill to the chamber where it originated within 30 days after the date of receipt, a bill may become a law even without the President's signature. If the President does not sign a bill within 30 days from receipt in his office, a bill may also become a law without President's signature if Congress overrides a presidential veto by two-thirds vote. Do you have any questions so far? If you have, you may comment down below your questions, or you may send it to your teacher for them to answer it for you. Guess it's time to say goodbye for now, my dear learners. See you next time.